Welcome, dear listeners, and a very happy Halloween season to you. Tonight, I invite you to settle in, relax, and join me on a journey through time as we uncover the true history of Halloween. Together, we'll walk through the misty hills of ancient Celtic lands, stand before the great bonfires of Samhain, and witness the transformation of an age-old pagan festival into the Christian holy day of All Hallows Eve. But before we begin, I would be so delighted if you would drop a comment telling me where in the world you are listening from and what time it is for you now. It makes me so happy to know others are here with me. Let's begin. To understand the true history of Halloween, we must travel back more than 2,000 years to the misty hills and windswept valleys of ancient Ireland, Scotland, and parts of northern France. This was the homeland of the Celts, a people whose lives revolved around the cycles of nature and whose spiritual beliefs gave birth to one of the most enduring festivals of human history, Samhain. Samhain was no ordinary holiday. It marked the end of summer's warmth and the beginning of the long, cold darkness of winter. For the Celts, who had no modern comforts to protect them from frost and famine, this was not just a change of seasons, it was a moment of deep uncertainty. Their harvest was complete, their livestock were brought down from summer pastures, and food stores were prepared to last the coming months. But no one knew for certain if they would survive the winter, and so Samhain was both a celebration and a warning. The Celts believed that on the night of October 31st, the boundaries between the world of the living and the world of the dead grew thin, so thin that spirits could pass through. Friendly ancestors might return to visit, but darker, malevolent forces might also wander into villages. To protect themselves, people built massive bonfires on hilltops. These were not just flames for warmth, but sacred fires. The Druids, Celtic priests who served as keepers of wisdom and spiritual guides, oversaw the lighting of these fires with solemn ritual. Into the blaze went offerings, crops, food, even animals, gifts to the gods to ensure survival through the harsh winter. Imagine the scene, an autumn night where the stars are hidden by smoke, the air smells of burning wood and roasting grain, and villagers gather in shadowy circles. The Druids chant and cast divinations, attempting to peer into the uncertain future. Would the coming months bring plenty or hunger? Would families remain safe, or would death stalk the land with the cold? This belief in the thinning of the veil shaped the customs of the night. People wore disguises, sometimes animal skins, sometimes masks made of wood or bone, to confuse the wandering spirits. If a ghost or malevolent being crossed their path, they hoped their strange appearance would trick it into passing them by. This was, in essence, the origin of Halloween costumes. But the Celts did not see Samhain only as a time of fear. It was also a time of connection with their dead. They believed ancestors could return home, and so many families left offerings of food and drink at their doorways or on their hearths to welcome them. Candles were lit in windows to guide loved ones back through the darkness. In this way, Samhain was both a night of dread and of reunion, a paradox of human emotion, acknowledging death while embracing the hope of communion with those they had lost. Samhain was also closely tied to Celtic mythology. The otherworld, a realm of spirits and gods, was thought to bleed into the mortal world during this festival. Tales were told of strange beings slipping through the cracks, fairies, yes, but not the delicate winged creatures of modern imagination. these were the Iosi, powerful, sometimes dangerous entities who could bless or curse humans, depending on how they were treated. Offerings were left at sacred trees, wells, or crossroads to keep these beings appeased. Crossing their path without respect could bring misfortune for the entire season. In Celtic lore, Samhain also marked times of great mythological events. Many Irish epic tales describe battles, heroic challenges, and supernatural encounters happening during this liminal night. The Tainbo Cuailnge, or Cattle Raid of Cooley, one of the greatest Irish sagas, has scenes tied to the season of Samhain. It was understood that the instability between worlds allowed for destiny to be tested, and so heroes often faced trials at this time of year. Fire played a crucial symbolic role. The great bonfires, once burning, were believed to have protective power. People carried torches lit from these sacred flames back to their homes, where they would relight their hearths. In this way, the community shared one united fire, binding them together against the darkness. It was a way of saying, we face winter as one. The fire symbolized life, protection, and continuity in a world where death loomed close at hand. Divination was another key part of Samhain. Since the festival marked a turning point in the year, people were eager to know what the future would bring. Simple games and rituals were performed, many of which seem quaint today but carried great meaning. For example, apples, newly harvested, were often used. Young people would bob for apples in water or hang them on strings, believing that the first to bite one would be the next to marry. Hazelnuts were thrown into fires to predict relationships. If a nut popped loudly, it meant a promising future. Though playful, these traditions carried a serious undertone, the desire to glimpse fate when so much of life was uncertain. The natural landscape also influenced the fears and beliefs tied to Samhain. As the days shortened and the nights grew longer, darkness dominated. The howling of the wind across bare fields, the sight of skeletal trees against a dim sky, the calls of owls in the distance, all were reminders that life was retreating and death was near. For people who lived without electricity or modern medicine, the long winter was terrifying. Illness, starvation, and exposure were constant threats, and so the idea that spirits roamed freely was not just myth. It reflected very real fears of the season. Even after centuries, many Samhain traditions would endure. The idea of disguising oneself to ward off spirits became the basis for costumes. The offering of food to both the dead and wandering beings foreshadowed trick or treating. The bonfires evolved into smaller hearth flames and later into the candle-lit pumpkins we know today. Though much would change, the roots of Halloween always remain tied to this ancient Celtic night, when the world of the living and the dead touched hands. Samhain was, at its heart, a festival of thresholds, the threshold between autumn and winter, between life and death, between the mortal world and the other world. Standing at this crossroads, the Celts looked both backward, honouring their ancestors, and forward, seeking protection for the unknown future. It was a time of fear, yes, but also of hope, and it is from this powerful paradox that Halloween was born. As centuries passed, the mighty Celtic tribes who had celebrated Samhain found themselves facing a new power, the expanding influence of Christianity. By the early Middle Ages, missionaries and rulers sought not only to convert the people, but also to reshape their festivals, weaving them into the growing fabric of Christian Europe. And so Samhain, the Celtic New Year, the night when spirits roamed, would be reborn under a new name, All Hallows Eve. Let us step into the 7th and 8th centuries. Pope Boniface IV had already established a day to honour martyrs and saints, and in the year 609 he consecrated the Pantheon in Rome to Saint Mary and all martyrs. This celebration took place in May, but as the Church expanded northward into Celtic lands, it found itself confronting Samhain. Pagan fires still blazed on October nights. People still whispered of spirits and fairies wandering in the dark. The Church, rather than erasing these customs entirely, chose a clever path: transformation. By the reign of Pope Gregory III in the 8th century, All Saints' Day was officially moved to November 1st. This was no coincidence. It directly overlapped with Samhain. The intent was clear: give the people a holy alternative. Instead of fearing the restless dead, Christians were to honour the holy dead, the saints and martyrs who had achieved eternal life. The night before, October 31st, became All Hallows Eve. Hallow, meaning holy or sacred. Over time, the words blended together, and in common speech it became Halloween. But old habits die hard. Even as Christianity spread, the people of Ireland, Scotland and beyond clung to their traditions. Bonfires still burned in the hills, though now they were sometimes blessed by priests. Villagers still wore disguises at night, though the Church reinterpreted these acts as ways of warding off demons rather than confusing ancestral spirits. The merging of old and new created a strange hybrid, half sacred, half superstitious. One of the most fascinating customs to emerge during this period was the practice of souling. On All Hallows Eve, the poor would go door to door, offering prayers for the souls of the dead in exchange for food. Families, eager to ensure the safe passage of their loved ones into heaven, offered small breads known as soul cakes. These round cakes, often spiced with nutmeg or cinnamon, were marked with a cross. The giver would say, "A soul cake for a prayer," and the recipient would promise to remember the departed. The more cakes distributed, the more prayers spoken, and the more souls supposedly freed from purgatory. Children soon took up this tradition as well, knocking on doors with cheerful chants, requesting soul cakes in exchange for prayers. This was an early ancestor of trick-or-treating, rooted not in candy but in the spiritual economy of medieval Christianity. In this way, Halloween became tied not only to fear of spirits, but also to acts of charity and remembrance. Meanwhile, other customs lingered in rural areas. In parts of Britain and Ireland, people still carved faces into turnips or large beets, placing candles inside them to ward off evil. These gnarled, flickering lanterns looked frightening in the dark, their grimaces glowing from windowsills or pathways. They were said to chase away malevolent beings, but also to represent lost souls. Later, when Halloween crossed the Atlantic, the pumpkin, a much larger and easier fruit to carve, would take its place. Church leaders often walked a fine line in dealing with these customs. On one hand, they sought to stamp out what they considered pagan superstition. On the other, they recognized the deep human need to honor the dead, to mark the passage of seasons, to confront the mysteries of life and death. By reframing Samhain as All Hallows Eve, they allowed the people to keep much of the ritual, while reshaping its meaning to fit Christian doctrine. During the medieval period, Halloween was also associated with All Souls' Day, celebrated on November 2nd. This was a time to remember not just the saints, but ordinary Christians who had died. Together, these 3 days, October 31st, November 1st and November 2nd, formed what was known as Hallowtide, or the Triduum of All Hallows. It was a season of prayer, remembrance and reflection, but also of fear, for the medieval imagination was steeped in visions of heaven, hell and purgatory. Ghost stories flourished during this era. People told tales of spirits trapped between worlds, of souls in purgatory appearing to ask the living for help, of demons lurking in the shadows on All Hallows Eve. These stories were not just entertainment, they were warnings. They reminded villagers of the thin veil between life and death, and of the importance of living a pious life. The Church also used this time for pageantry. In some regions, processions of the faithful carried relics of saints through the streets, accompanied by prayers, hymns, and candlelight. These processions coexisted with the more rustic traditions of masks and bonfires, creating a fascinating tapestry of sacred and secular. The people prayed to saints by day and disguised themselves from spirits by night. Divination games, too, remained popular. Even in Christian villages, young men and women used All Hallows Eve to glimpse their romantic futures. Nuts roasted on a fire might reveal whether a couple's love would last. Apples were peeled, their skins dropped on the floor, in hopes they would form the initial of a future spouse. These seemingly innocent games were tied to the old Celtic belief that Samhain was a time when fate was visible, when the veil allowed not only spirits, but also glimpses of destiny to pass through. The Church tolerated such practices as long as they remained playful and did not invoke pagan gods. One can imagine how layered the atmosphere of medieval Halloween must have been. Picture a village where church bells toll for the souls of the departed, processions march through candle-lit streets, and yet just beyond the square, children run with carved lanterns, their shadows leaping across walls. In cottages, families pray for loved ones gone, while outside masked figures wander past bonfires, their disguises half festive, half eerie. The mingling of worlds, sacred and profane, Christian and Celtic, made Halloween one of the most complex nights of the year. By the late Middle Ages, the festival was firmly entrenched. Samhain had not disappeared. It had transformed. Its bones were still there, the fear of death, the honouring of ancestors, the rituals of disguise and offering. But now these were dressed in Christian clothing. Halloween had become a night of saints and souls, prayers and cakes, but also masks and mischief. It is this fusion that ensured Halloween's survival. Had the Church crushed Samhain outright, the traditions might have withered. But by weaving them into Christian practice, the old ways lived on, changed, yes, but enduring. And because of that, when Europeans began to cross the Atlantic centuries later, they carried Halloween with them. From bonfires to soul cakes, from disguises to ghost stories, Halloween in the Christian era was a festival of contradictions. It was holy and haunted, sacred and superstitious, solemn and playful. And in those contradictions it reflected something deeply human, our longing to honour the dead, our fear of the unknown, and our hope to glimpse what lies beyond the veil. By the time the first ships carried European settlers across the Atlantic, Halloween was already centuries old. It had lived through transformations, from Celtic Samhain to Christian All Hallows Eve, to a mixture of solemn ritual and village superstition. But in the New World, this strange old festival would find fresh soil, adapt to new surroundings, and eventually bloom into the holiday we recognise today. Let us begin in the 17th century when Puritans and other Protestant settlers first established colonies in New England. These communities were deeply religious, suspicious of anything they viewed as pagan or Catholic in origin. To them, All Hallows Eve smelled too much of superstition, too much of old-world ritual. In Puritan Massachusetts, for example, Halloween was not celebrated at all. The emphasis was on work, piety, and scripture, not on bonfires and disguises. But beyond Puritan New England, in colonies where settlers from Ireland, Scotland, and parts of Catholic Europe made their homes, fragments of Halloween traditions survived. In Maryland, Virginia, and other areas more tolerant of ritual, seasonal festivities, harvest gatherings, storytelling, and fortune-telling games were still practiced. These customs blended with Native American harvest celebrations and with the diverse traditions of immigrants from all over Europe. Slowly, a uniquely American version of Halloween began to take shape. One of the most important turning points came in the 19th century, with the massive waves of Irish and Scottish immigration. Between the 1840s and 1850s, the Irish potato famine drove millions from their homeland, many of them to the United States. With them came the rich folklore of Samhain and All Hallows Eve. They brought the stories of wandering spirits, of Stingy Jack and his cursed lantern, of disguises and mischief. And in this new land, these traditions flourished. It was here, in America, that the carved lantern truly evolved. In the old countries, people had hollowed out turnips or large beets, carving grotesque faces into them to frighten away spirits. But in North America, they found a far more suitable canvas, the pumpkin. Pumpkins were native to the New World, larger, easier to carve, and abundant in the fall. Soon the jack-o'-lantern became a symbol not just of Irish folklore, but of the holiday itself. Imagine the glow of dozens of pumpkins lit on porches, their toothy grins shining against the dark autumn night. The folklore behind the jack-o'-lantern is worth pausing on. One popular Irish tale tells of Stingy Jack, a miserly man who tricked the devil several times. When Jack died, neither heaven nor hell would take him. Condemned to wander the earth, he carried only a hollowed-out turnip with a glowing coal inside to light his way. In America, the turnip became the pumpkin, and Jack's cursed lantern became a fixture of Halloween. Alongside lanterns came the revival of mischief and pranks. In the late 19th century, Halloween in America was often a night of rowdiness. Young men overturned outhouses, unhinged gates, soaped windows, and played practical jokes on neighbours. Sometimes these pranks veered into real vandalism, alarming communities. To channel this energy into something more wholesome, towns and civic leaders began encouraging organised Halloween parties and parades. Slowly, Halloween became less about mischief and more about community celebration. It was also in this period that Halloween games spread widely. Bobbing for apples, a fortune-telling game with roots in Celtic and Roman traditions, became a staple. Apples were tied to love and fertility, and young people used the game to divine romantic futures. Storytelling also flourished. Families gathered to share ghost tales by firelight, blending old-world myths with American folklore, stories of witches, haunted houses, and restless spirits unique to this new land. By the late 1800s, a cultural shift was underway. Middle-class reformers wanted to soften Halloween's rough edges and emphasize community and family fun. They organized neighborhood gatherings where children played games, wore costumes, and enjoyed seasonal food. Magazines of the era even printed guides for hosting Halloween parties, complete with decorations, recipes, and fortune-telling activities. Halloween was moving away from being a night of danger or fear and becoming a night of festivity. Costumes during this time were still simple, often homemade. Children might dress as ghosts with white sheets or as witches with pointed hats. Masks were often crude, made from cloth or papier-mâché. Yet, even in their simplicity, these disguises echoed the ancient Celtic practice of warding off spirits. Beneath the playfulness lay an echo of something much older, much darker. By the early 20th century, Halloween was firmly established as an American holiday, but one still in flux. It was no longer a strictly religious event, nor purely a night of pranks. Instead, it was a hybrid, part harvest festival, part community celebration, part ghostly tradition. And with the growing influence of newspapers, magazines, and later radio and film, Halloween began to spread more evenly across the country, reaching even areas where it had once been unknown. The final transformation would come with the rise of trick-or-treating. In the 1920s and 1930s, communities experimented with the idea of channeling children's energy into going door to door in costume, receiving small gifts of food or candy. This practice was inspired in part by the old European customs of souling and guising, but in America it became something new. After World War II, with the baby boom and the growth of suburban neighborhoods, trick-or-treating exploded. Parents encouraged it as a safe alternative to vandalism, and candy companies eagerly supplied the treats. By the 1950s, the Halloween we know, costume children knocking on doors, bags open for candy, was in full swing. Thus, the New World had taken the bones of Samhain and All Hallows Eve, reshaped them with immigrant folklore, and dressed them in American creativity. The jack-o'-lantern replaced the turnip. Mischief was tamed into parades and trick-or-treating. Ghost stories merged with frontier legends, and slowly Halloween became not just an imported custom, but an American institution. By the mid-20th century, Halloween was ready to take its final leap, not just across neighborhoods and towns, but into the realm of mass media, commerce, and global culture. From its roots in Irish hillsides and Christian prayers, Halloween had crossed the ocean and planted itself firmly in American soil. And here, it would grow into something larger than its founders could ever have imagined. By the middle of the 20th century, Halloween in America had transformed from an immigrant folk tradition into a community holiday. Jack-o'-lanterns glowed on porches, children roamed neighborhoods in costume, and trick-or-treating had become a cherished ritual. But this was only the beginning. In the decades to come, Halloween would outgrow its roots, fueled by commerce, media, and imagination, until it became the billion-dollar global celebration we recognize today. Let's begin in the 1920s and 1930s, when Halloween was still a community affair. Families hosted parties, towns held parades, and children enjoyed simple homemade costumes. But there was still a mischievous edge. Vandalism was common, soaping windows, tipping over outhouses, even setting small fires. To curb this destructive streak, civic leaders encouraged trick-or-treating as a safe alternative. The Great Depression, however, meant that treats were often apples, nuts, or baked goods rather than candy. Yet the core idea that children could go door to door in costume, receiving gifts in exchange for good behaviour, was firmly planted. After World War II, Halloween exploded in popularity. The baby boom filled neighbourhoods with children, and the prosperity of the 1950s meant families had more to spend on celebrations. Suburbs spread across America, creating perfect trick-or-treating neighbourhoods with rows of decorated houses. Candy manufacturers seized the opportunity. Companies like Hershey's and Mars began marketing small, individually wrapped candies as the perfect Halloween giveaway. By the 1970s, candy had replaced homemade goods almost entirely, cementing Halloween as a sweet-filled tradition. Meanwhile, costume culture also changed. Early disguises were often ghosts, witches, or clowns. But by the mid-20th century, mass-produced costumes flooded the market. Companies like Ben Cooper incorporated licensed characters from popular culture, Superman, Mickey Mouse, Casper the Friendly Ghost, and sold inexpensive boxed costumes with plastic masks. Suddenly, children weren't just dressing as spirits to confuse ghosts. They were embodying superheroes, cartoon characters, and movie icons. Halloween costumes became as much about pop culture as tradition. Hollywood played a massive role in reshaping the holiday. In 1949, Disney released The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and in the following decades, Halloween-themed TV specials became an annual tradition. Who could forget It's the Great Pumpkin, Charlie Brown in 1966, with Linus waiting earnestly in the pumpkin patch? These programs cemented Halloween as a family holiday, full of whimsy and anticipation. But Hollywood also fueled Halloween's darker side. In 1978, John Carpenter's Halloween changed horror cinema forever. The story of Michael Myers stalking babysitters on Halloween night created a new association, October 31st, as a time of terror. This launched a wave of slasher films, Friday the 13th, A Nightmare on Elm Street, that turned Halloween into the scariest night of the year. The paradox was complete. Halloween was both for children in cute costumes and for adults seeking thrills in the theatre. By the late 20th century, Halloween had grown into a cultural and commercial powerhouse. Candy sales soared. Costume shops sprang up every autumn. Haunted houses and theme park attractions turned fear into profit. In towns across America, October 31st became an economic engine. Today, Americans spend billions annually on Halloween, on candy, costumes, decorations, and entertainment, making it the second largest commercial holiday after Christmas. Yet Halloween also became increasingly inclusive. Adults embraced it, hosting costume parties, decorating homes with elaborate displays, and competing in pumpkin carving contests. College campuses and nightclubs made it a night of revelry. For many adults, Halloween offered something rare: permission to play, to become someone else for an evening, to laugh at fear. The masks of ancient Samhain had returned, now made of plastic and sequins, but still serving the same purpose: transformation. In recent decades, Halloween has gone global. In Mexico, it mingles with Dia de los Muertos, the Day of the Dead, a celebration that honors ancestors with altars, marigolds, and sugar skulls. In Japan, Halloween parades fill the streets of Tokyo with costumed revelers, blending Western traditions with anime and pop culture. In Europe, especially in Ireland and Scotland, the festival has returned to its roots. Celebrated with both ancient fire festivals and modern trick-or-treating, across the world people carve pumpkins, don costumes, and embrace the spirit of the holiday. Technology, too, has reshaped Halloween. Social media now showcases elaborate decorations, makeup tutorials, and viral costume ideas. Streaming services curate Halloween playlists of horror films and spooky specials. Children watch YouTube channels dedicated to Halloween crafts and games. In a way, the global village has created a new kind of bonfire, not one of wood and flame, but of shared images and stories glowing from our screens. And yet, beneath the candy wrappers and movie marathons, something of the old festival still lingers. The thin veil between worlds, the remembrance of the dead, the acknowledgement of life's fragility, all these themes remain present. Lighting a jack-o'-lantern still echoes the fires on Celtic hills. Dressing in costumes still recalls the disguises worn to confuse spirits. Telling ghost stories, watching horror films, or decorating homes with skeletons and gravestones still speaks to the same timeless fascination with death and the unknown. Halloween has become a mirror of human culture itself. It is playful and frightening, sacred and commercial, ancient and modern. It reminds us that even as centuries pass, people still seek ways to face fear, to honour memory, and to celebrate life amid the darkness. So when we see children running down sidewalks in superhero costumes, their bags heavy with candy, or when we sit in a darkened theatre as a horror film makes our hearts race, or when we light a pumpkin's grin on our porch, we are not just partaking in a holiday. We are joining a chain of human tradition stretching back over 2,000 years, from Celtic druids around a sacred bonfire, to medieval villagers sharing soul cakes, to immigrants carving pumpkins in a new world, to today's global celebrations. Halloween has always been and remains a festival of thresholds. It is the night when we play with fear, the night when we remember the dead, the night when we dress as something other than ourselves, if only for a moment. And whether we call it Samhain, All Hallows Eve, or Halloween, it speaks to something universal in the human heart, our eternal dance with mystery, darkness, and the light we carry against it.